All right, we're here at my tiny worm bin, and the last time we were in here, we counted 1,008 worms, and we restarted this bin. So it has been 7 days since we were in here last, and all we did was fill it with some wet cardboard, and we put 5 strawberries in here for food. So these worms got a bath because we had some mite issues when we were running it last time, and with that bath, we hope to get most of the mites off. So they were a little unhappy when we first put them in here, but after 7 days and those strawberries, we should have some happy worms in here. And here's a real tiny one right there. Now, because this is just shredded cardboard, it's going to be hard to see them. When we were in here last time, you could see lots of worms and worm balls because the castings were so dark and the worms contrasted with it. But with this shredded cardboard, they're kind of the same color. So let's go ahead and dig underneath and see if we find any of those strawberry tops. I'm seeing a few worms right there. And the reason I use strawberry tops at the beginning is because you can see the fruit and they eat that really quick, but then the top, the leafy part, takes them a little bit longer. So you can get in there and kind of find out how much they have eaten. And after 7 days, I don't know if I expect to see any of the strawberry leafy part at all. So this is good. This is all them kind of turning the cardboard and that strawberry into castings. So let's go ahead and dig over here. Now the smell of the bin right now is just a little unusual. Typically a worm bin will just have an earthy smell, but when you just wet a bunch of cardboard, it's gonna smell like wet cardboard. No decaying smells or bad smells or anything like that, just a little bit different than a typical worm bin. And right here you can see kind of a chunky worm, some smaller worms, and some more smaller worms over here on my fingers. So I did a pretty good job of counting both the little ones and the big ones because I wanted to get to 1,000 after we had passed about the 800 mark. So this is looking good. I'm finding the worms all throughout, each handful. So they are happy and the moisture feels good down low. Now up top, it felt pretty dry. So we are going to do something that I should have done on the last round, and that is to put some plastic on the top of it. Now, if this was the middle of winter, I may hold off and not put plastic on the top at all. But we are still kind of in the summertime here in Florida. It is the middle of September, and the air conditioning is still working about 10 hours a day. So it is just ripping the moisture right out of the air and drying out my worm bin. So depending on how your climate is, if you have an indoor outdoor worm bin, you kind of have to assess, am I in a kind of drying condition or am I in a really humid condition, to kind of figure out, do I need to put plastic on top or not? If you're giving a lot of wet foods or you wet down your bin, then, maybe you don't need plastic. And if you have a draining bin with a lid on it, you certainly don't need plastic. But for me, for this non-draining bin, it's just a Rubbermaid tote. Oh, there's a little baby worm. So cute. Just a Rubbermaid tote. Oh, now it wants to stay with me. That doesn't drain. I'm going to kind of get kind of a different distribution of moisture within the bin. So down low, I'm going to be a little bit more moist, and up top, I'm going to be a little bit drier. So what I'll do is I'll add the plastic to the top this time, and then I will assess from there how it's doing. If I need to, after I feed the next time, I'll just leave it off. All right, so I'm really excited about this. I don't see any strawberry tops. The worms are all throughout it. I don't see any pockets where they're just kind of hiding or trying to get away. I left the lid off for 48 hours. So I didn't have any worms kind of trying to get to the sides and trying to escape or anything because they were confused. After 48 hours, I put that lid back on and no issues whatsoever. So another thing I did when I restarted this bin was I put a lot of cardboard in. I kind of made it a little bit higher because I wanted to bulk up this bin, and I have not a whole lot of room to put my food in and to add more bedding. So until they start breaking a lot more of this down into castings, we're going to have kind of a high bin here. So I've made a little feeding zone, and in here is where we will put the food. All right, so this is what we had in mind for a feeding. Now this is their very first big feeding. They had those 5 strawberry tops when we started them, but remember, I have 1,000 worms in here. You may have started with 100 or 500. You definitely don't want to put this much food in here because the biggest mistake with worm bins is to overfeed. So we are just gonna start putting some food down. And typically I'll put some bedding down first, but we have a lot of bedding in here and I'm gonna kind of mix it in on the top. And this is just a bunch of frozen tomatoes that my mom had given me. And we are gonna put a little half peach in here. Now, I believe peaches are faster foods, so this should last a little bit longer than like an apple or a pear, but it will probably take longer to eat than these strawberries. And again, I have to stress to you that I have 1,000 worms in here, so they can eat a little bit more than if I had started with 50 to 100 like I did when I started this bin over a year and a half ago. So let's go ahead and put just a little bit of bedding in. We have so much bedding already, I really don't need to put some in, but as a habit, I'm gonna do it. Every time I feed, I put a little bit of bedding in. So there we go right there, and typically I'll put it on the bottom. I just kind of forgot as I was going, but being on top is fine too. But when I started the bin 7 days ago, all I put in was the strawberry tops. I didn't put any amendments in there. So I'm just gonna put just a tiny little bit of worm chow. This is a tiny bin, so you're not gonna see me put as much as I put in like my vermi hut or my outdoor worm bins. And next, we're just gonna take some used coffee and tea grounds. This is just another food source for them. And we're gonna lay that down in here. Again, we're just spreading it very lightly and evenly because they already have a lot of food. And then finally, the only grit that these worms have is the grit that's already in their stomach. So we are going to put down some pulverized eggshells, and worms use grit to digest their food, kind of like birds do. So they'll go ahead and ingest this and it'll help them make their food even smaller than it is. So there you go. There's the feeding for our tiny worm bin. It is, I guess, technically their second feeding because they got an initial feeding when they jumped into this bin. But again, not too much for 1,000 worms. And we'll just go ahead and bury it up. And when I mixed up, or when I was digging around, I was kind of aerating the bin out. I like to do that at every feeding just so I can make sure that there's no pockets of ammonia smells or sour smells, that kind of thing, because that means that something is fermenting or something is decaying in your bin, especially if you smell ammonia, outside of the normal process of a worm eating it and turning it into castings. So we don't want any of that. Especially with a new bin, you want to kind of be cognizant of that because the #1 problem with a new bin is overfeeding and actually having too much moisture. So there we go. I think I'm also going to put down some worm chow on top. So let's do that. And again, just very lightly. I've done this in my other bins and I come in like a day or two later and the worms are just all on top of the bedding, eating the worm chow. It's pretty great. So next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna put a little piece of newspaper on here. And then the plastic we're gonna use is some bubble wrap. It's got these little bubbles on it that when I was a kid, I used to love to pop. So we'll just kind of put those upside down, and the water, as it kind of evaporates or turns into condensation, will kind of hit the plastic and then drip back down into the bin. So that's how it kind of saves the moisture. But I've also left some areas here for air to circulate within this bin. So that's it. This is the second feeding or first feeding, depending on how you want to categorize it, of my tiny worm bin. So I hope you're all having a great day. I hope your worm bins are doing good. So happy vermicomposting, everybody. Take care now.